The UDL in 15 Minutes logo, which has a circle around the words UDL in blue, in yellow, and 15 min in red, followed by a selfie of Elaina Fennell, a white woman with closely cut brown hair wearing a blue turtleneck and silver necklace with 5 circular cutouts. Hello, and welcome to UDL in 15 Minutes, where educators discuss their experiences with UDL. I'm Louie Lord Nelson, UDL author and leader. Today, I'm talking with Elaina Fennell, a K-12 program implementation specialist in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. Elaina is going to talk about her own shift in how she delivers professional development. Welcome, Elaina.
Hello, I am so excited to be here today, Louie. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with me.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to be here and talk with me. So, what I'd love for you to do first is to describe the roles you've had in education and the role you have now.
All right, so this is year 19 for me in education. I have taught all grades from kindergarten right to grade 12, with the exception of high school math and science. So I was a classroom teacher for about 12 years, an administrator, so an assistant principal and a principal for a total of 3 years. And this is my fourth year as a program implementation specialist.
Wow. Wow. Okay, you've got everything. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm betting that that has a lot of influence on your lens to UDL, all those different experiences. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
So, okay, within that role of program implementation specialist, one of the things you do is deliver professional development. And there are lots of people around the world that do just that. They deliver professional development. And I think you've had a takeaway, though, that if applied by everyone, would dramatically shift PD and improve PD all over the world. The NL Schools logo, black block letters spelling NL Schools, but one of the O's is an apple. To the right, in script letters, is Newfoundland, Labrador, with orange poppies sprouting behind the words.
Absolutely. So thanks for that. So yeah, a large part of my role in what I do is to work alongside of teachers in schools to support them with anything really related to policy development, curriculum, teaching, learning, assessment as it relates to their own professional learning and doing. And for me, this can look a little different depending on what is needed. So sometimes I work one on one with a teacher. Sometimes it could be in a small group, such as like in a cohort type of setting. Sometimes it's school based. So I do a professional learning session with a whole school, or it could be a larger group. For example, we do a lot of virtual professional learning, and sometimes that could be province wide or it could be just a large group of teachers who are interested in that particular learning topic. So, to give you a little background on the shift in my own thinking, which has led to major changes in my practice, I want to share a little bit about my learning journey, the mistakes that I have made, and how I used those mistakes to be in the place I am. And I've always told my learners that it's from the mistakes we make that we learn the most. So, I'm going to take that and give myself a little bit of grace with this.
6 teachers writing on 2 different sheets of chart paper and listing the barriers learners face during specific activities.
So I've been learning about UDL for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, how really to implement universal design for learning in my own practice, and then how best to help the teachers in the schools that I support to do that themselves in their classrooms. And it was during this time that our province actually introduced a new policy called responsive teaching and learning, which named UDL as one of the frameworks to work within to be responsive to all learners in our classrooms. So, UDL, to my delight, over the last few years, have really been gaining traction in our province. So, as I began learning more about universal design for learning, I recognized the importance of my own mindset and my own beliefs and how what I believe really aligns and connects to what we do.
A profile line drawing of the brain with four colored gears inside of it. The words mindset, skills, practices, and UDL guidelines are inside each of the gears.
And Louie, I want to give you a huge shout out because your work around the UDL gears, that analogy, have really shaped and shifted my thinking about UDL implementation. And it's something that I use when I work with teachers to show that UDL is so much more than the guidelines. That, when we have all of those four pieces coming together to connect, that's really when we can start seeing the magic happen. So, when I think about my own core beliefs around learning and around UDL, the most important pieces for me is that learner variability piece. And understanding that while we are all different, that depending on the context, depending on the situation, can really mean differences for how learners understand and learn. And the belief that all learners can learn and achieve high expectations if the right learning conditions are created. I'm a fan of John Hattie's work around effect size. And, I really believe that, teacher efficacy is vital for student learning. So when I start thinking about my work around helping, teachers, shift their practice and, maybe tighten up some things, that's kind of where I would begin. I would begin the conversations around learner variability and really trying to help start seeing that all learners in your class can learn. And when we really get those learning conditions created in a way that makes learning accessible to all by removing those barriers. So this is where it gets kind of, I don't want to say funny, but ironic, because somewhere along the line, I forgot those things when I was designing learning for my teachers. And when I reflect now on some of the first learning opportunities and sessions that I did with teachers, I realize now that I firmly believe that all students in our classrooms can learn if barriers were removed, if we created those conditions. But my practices and the things I was doing with the adult learners, I see now they weren't really aligned to that belief. So when I think about how I, in the beginning, how I started designing the learning, I found myself, I was the one setting the learning goals for the sessions, thinking about what I wanted to achieve in that time. I found myself speaking a lot, talking a lot, presenting, I guess disseminating information. I was the one doing, and I was the one, I guess, doing the thinking in those sessions. So, when I think about it now and I can kind of cringe, it really was a one size fits all kind of session. And I really don't like that thinking. I don't like that.
Yeah.
But here we are. So I thought I was doing okay because I was embedding choices within those sessions. I had beautiful choice boards created,
Mhm.
giving the teachers opportunity to go off and read an article or listen to a podcast or
Yep.
have a chat with their colleagues. But now when I reflect on it, I wonder if the choices I were given was actually meaningful and relevant to the learning that was intended. I walk away from those sessions not feeling really good about it, wondering what was going on, what was happening. And I wasn't really considering myself as what I was doing to create the learning, to create those conditions. And I would pretty much pass it off and, put the responsibility back on the learners or the lack thereof of the learning that was happening.
A corner inside Elena's greenhouse. Wooden tabletops hold at least 20 large pots with plants. A glass top table in the center holds three other pots waiting to be filled.
So I'm an avid gardener. I love growing my own vegetables. I have a greenhouse. So it wasn't until one day I was in my greenhouse that I had this moment. So I went in the greenhouse to water all my pepper and tomato plants, and everything was growing beautifully. and I noticed there was a little tiny green pepper plant in the corner of the greenhouse, and it wasn't growing as well as the rest. I looked around and I'm thinking, like, what is happening? What is wrong with this green pepper plant? And then it hit me. It wasn't the green pepper plant, it was the conditions that I was creating for that plant that was inhibiting the growth. It was in a small pot in the corner, it wasn't as warm. And then I realized then the problem of what I was doing in these sessions, that I was the creator and the designer of the learning, and I wasn't creating the optimal learning conditions for the people that I was basically responsible for. So I remember running back to my house and opening up my laptop and going back through some of the sessions that I had created, and with a more critical lens, through the lens of me being responsible for creating those conditions.
A black and white photo of a white male movie star with the quote in white letters reading, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower."
And I started seeing ways that I could improve. I realized the bias in my own thinking, I guess. And it was that moment then that I really started shifting my thinking and believing that while I would speak and talk to the teachers I work with to think about, the fact that all students in their classroom can learn, I had to make that shift in my thinking that all the teachers that I work with, they were my class, that I believe that all of those people could learn, and that I had to find ways to remove barriers for them to do that. So once I realized that it was me who was basically in control of creating those conditions, like I said, I really started taking more of a critical look at what I was doing. I realized I had a lot of unlearning, because I realized what I was doing was, again, disseminating information. I was creating passive learners in my spaces, and I needed to change that. I knew, with everything that I have been learning about universal design for learning and what I believed, I really had to shift my thinking and my doing to make things better. So I went back to the UDL guidelines to really help me find the areas that I needed to improve. And I realized the engagement principle was kind of where I had to focus a little more on. And then I used the UDL gears as well to really dig into the skills that I thought that I needed to work on. And that's kind of where I focused. I recognized pretty quickly that some of the practices that I was using within the professional learning sessions, that I was actually creating barriers instead of removing them. So one of the other pieces to, when I really sat down with myself, I remember having a self-talk. I really wanted to look at the whole piece of how I worked with teachers, of how I showed up in those spaces, and looked at every part of how I designed and created the learning, from the setup of the room to the body language I used, to the medium that I actually used to present. I noticed some of my slides were really, there's a lot of things that wasn't necessary, so to speak. And even like how I organized the day and the session and the amount of time I talked, I knew I needed to change.
Participants around a set of three tables, computers, papers, books, coffee cups, and sticky notes show a busy working space.
So again, I used the advice that I would tell my own teachers: start small, choose one thing, the plus one approach. What's something that I was okay with taking away, and what's something that I wanted to try. And I gave myself a lot of grace. What I noticed when I started making some small changes is that the decisions became more intentional. So when I started to look at how I was designing the learning, I was more intentional about being present in the space. At the beginning of the sessions, if it was a school-based professional learning day, I would, be present in the staff room. I would make sure that I'm chatting with teachers first. Building those relationships became really important. If I was doing some work with teachers in their classrooms, I would go a day or two before to meet the students, capture some moments that, were really good, and I would highlight those things as I would start working with teachers, highlighting all the really great things they were already doing and trying to help connect what they were already doing with the UDL guidelines, with the practices, and with some of the things that we were going to work on. So that really seemed to help. The other thing, and I guess, again, those small changes, the other thing I really wanted to try was to include more teacher voice in the sessions, because I was creating the learning for them. It's not about me. It's about me letting that control go and having them see themselves in those learning spaces. So sometimes it's really hard for me to visit the schools and visit the classrooms that I'm going to be working in. So one of the strategies that I'm using now is I send
Mm.
out what we call a feed forward survey.
A Google form described by Elaina in the following section.
So before the learning session takes place, I send out a Google form with just some simple questions asking about what is it that you would like to learn? What are some things that are tricky for you right now? What are your learning preferences? What are some things you really don't like about full day professional learning days in your school? To get as much information from the learners so that I could take that and then co create, I guess, in a way, the goals for the session and really try and include as much of their feed forward in the session. But on the side of that, while I'm doing the sessions, while I'm working with these teachers, I've started being more intentional about sharing with them that I have used their voice, I have used their suggestions as I've been designing and creating the day for them. And, it seemed that they really appreciate that. And again, it's, they see themselves in that day versus me creating the day for them. Another piece that I think has really changed in the way that I work with teachers is, while, for me to create the learning, I do have to create some of the learning goals to keep me focused, to make sure that I'm hitting on what I need to hit on. I always create space at the beginning of the day or at the beginning of the work with teachers so that they can really reflect and think about where they are with this particular learning goal and then create their own personalized learning goal for the day. And then I ask them to keep me accountable as I go throughout the day to make sure that I am providing the options and opportunities for them to work through their own personalized learning goal. And then it becomes their own. Then, they're in control of what that day looks like. So when I give them time to collaborate, to reflect, to process, and, I'm providing options in how to do that, then they get to choose what they need at that time in thinking about their own learning to make it meaningful for them. That's been really good with, I guess, some of the changes that I've made. The one piece that is the hardest for me, I guess, in shifting practice is limiting the amount of time I speak or I present. And I've kind of have like an unwritten rule for every 15 minutes that I present or that I speak in the session, that I want to give the learners in the space at least that amount of time again to reflect, to process, to doodle, to do whatever they need to do to try and understand, to comprehend, whether that's to collaborate with their partners, or maybe there's even something, an email or something that they have to do right now that's creating a distraction for them in that learning space. So again, it's those small simple changes that has made such a huge impact on the learning that I'm able to facilitate for some of those teachers.
A selfie of Elaina wearing a mustard colored sweater, a black turtleneck, and a long silver necklace. Well, Elaina, you have given us just a wonderful, rich story. And I really appreciate you going through and talking about how you started, you definitely have a core belief with UDL. You align with it, but we all have the best intentions. And that you have also shared that aha that you had with in your own greenhouse and saying, "Ooh, wait a second. Huh. It's a learning environment thing. And if I really am going to speak to the variability of my adult learners, then I need to make some shifts." And then that powerful activity that you did that we know is so strong within a cycle of going back and not just reflecting, but actively making some changes and some shifts. And then, like you said, just saying, okay, where am I just going to start? I'm not going to try to go for this whole thing at once. I'm going to start with the plus one, the one thing. And I'm gonna build this. And then I also point, getting the voice of the learners beforehand, that feed forward survey, beautiful, wonderful. And I also agree with you that when we articulate to our learners, I've made this design based on what you gave to me. And, here are some ways. That's just, there's so many wonderful nuggets in here for people to take away with them. I really appreciate this so much. We have definitely we've gone beyond our 15 minutes. And that's fine because I think there's such rich, wonderful things in here. So thank you so, so much for all of this.
Oh, it was absolutely my pleasure. And hopefully, there may be some things that, like I said, other people can take away. And, when I work with my teachers, I keep telling them, just try one thing and see what happens.
Yeah.
So, me modeling that too is really important. Sometimes we have to take our own advice.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, exactly. Oh, well, thank you so much for this, Elena, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Louie.
Screen captures of the UDLapproach.com website, followed by the UDL in 15 minutes logo. So, for those listening to this podcast, you can find supplemental materials like an image montage with closed captioning, that montage with audio descriptions, a transcript, and an associated blog at my website, which is the udlapproach.com/podcasts. And finally, if you have a story to share about UDL implementation for UDL in 15 minutes, you can contact me through the udlapproach.com. And thanks to everyone for your work in revolutionizing education through UDL and making it our goal to develop expert learners.